We start now with our first panel. That is not a real panel because it's a little bit too small, perhaps. Thank you, Nina. And then most of us professors like to speak from here. Others, in France, it's different. In Germany, at least, most of us. And then for the discussion, it is also very important, I think, that one has the chance to discuss after a talk. Sometimes, if it is just at the end of 4 people who have done their conferences, it will be one minor point that will make the big and the whole discussion, and I prefer the other way. I hope you share this feeling, at least for today. So, I come to the point that we start with this first part, and it is no wonder that we start with Stephen LUKES. Thank you so much for having made it possible to be with us over these 2 days of Durkheimian thought. I had the privilege to meet you at the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, Boulevard Raspail, after the Groupe d'études Durkheimiennes had been founded by our common friend, Philippe Bénard. It was the moment when, under the administrative hand of a genius, Clémence Heller, Paris had been the center of the intellectual world, hosting from Aron over Bourdieu, Bourricot, Cherkaoui, Touraine, and many others, the greatest minds of the time. But it was clear that in one respect, the historical and systematic analysis of the very founder of sociology as a discipline in France, an Englishman would bear the Palme d'Or, Stephen LUKES, with his wonderful book, Emile Durkheim, His Life and Work, never surpassed in clarity and completeness since it came out in the early 70s. Some of the younger might think that this is just a way to make some nice and respectful compliments to a senior research personality, but this would be a complete misunderstanding. For this book set a very high standard in a type of writing that was never reached for the case of Max Weber. If you show me the book about Max Weber, that would be the parallel. I would be very thankful to read it. Wolfgang Mommsen was fully aware of that and was on the way to write a similar work to integrate a close reading of a life and its textual objectifications. But we still have to wait for such a major work about Weber. But with Durkheim, the story of Stephen LUKES as an intellectual did not stop. The independence and perhaps sometimes dependence of his mind is documented in a long career of fundamental works about power structures and a lot of other things. Let me just quote: A Good Society, a book of readings, Marxism and Morality, and it was in a time when, yes, people wrote a little bit more about Marx, but some are still insisting on his importance. Moral Conflict and Politics, writings in Italian and other languages, Multicultural Citizenship, and also, as you know, he is the editor of Durkheim and the Law, a very useful book for all those who want to have a close look at Durkheim's readings on the law. So all this led him from the UK to Italy, around the world, to New York, and lastly to Vienna, where he resides as a fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences at the moment. I don't know when he will come over to us, perhaps not only to this place, but perhaps also to stay for a while with us. Would be great. This was an official invitation. Nina, excuse me, we have to talk about that. Excuse me, but it's now difficult to refuse. So sometimes consensus is maybe made in this sense, but we don't need it. Please, Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy.
Wow. Well, that was a wonderful introduction. I wish you could do it all over again. It's a great pleasure to be here. I hereby accept the invitation, by the way. I can't understand why it is that I have not been here before, but here we are. And it's from my brief observation so far, it seems to be a wonderful place. And it's a great pleasure to be here. Also, it's wonderful to be with a group, a collection of such interesting people, some of them old friends. It just occurs to me, by the way, from what Werner just said, I guess I'm one of the old guys, maybe the oldest guy, I don't know. But and also younger scholars, whom I'm much looking forward to meet. I've met one or two of you already. And this agenda that you've just been through sounds terrific. I'm looking forward to it. Especially this idea of bringing together the legal and political sociology with the sociology of religion. I completely agree that you can't do this, as it were, chronologically. There's no coupure épistémologique in Durkheim, as far as I can see. Now, what I'm going to do today is talk about norms. And I'm really glad that my talk now is going to be followed by Stephen Turner's, because I've read his book on normativity, and I think there's some really interesting maybe connection between our talks, so we'll see. So this talk is called Norms as Social Facts, and I'm going to give you only part of it because I'm required to speak for 30 minutes, and that's what I'll try and do. The issue of the question of what is a social fact, which was, of course, Durkheim's the title of Durkheim's first chapter in Les Règles de méthode sociologique. That question is, let's say, what I'm really interested in asking today is what is a social fact and what are norms? Not that I'm going to give you the answer, but it seems to me these questions are connected. And so I'm going to talk about, to begin with, what's often called methodological individualism. The issue of holism versus individualism, which is a question that's arisen, of course, in various fields and has been debated in successive waves. The discussion goes on and on. And one such wave was generated by Sir Karl Popper, along with his student and colleague Watkins, J.W.N. Watkins, and it's gone on for 3 decades after the Second World War, mainly among philosophers interested in social science, under the label of methodological individualism. Now, on the crest of that wave in 1960s, long ago, I am an old guy, I wrote in 1968 an article which was called Methodological Individualism Reconsidered. And it was published in the British Journal of Sociology. And in that article, very short article, I offered the following suggestion, that methodological individualism is either implausible or futile. It's implausible if it promises to explain what is social in exclusively individualistic terms. It's futile if one tries to render it less implausible. There were, and there continue to be, different accounts of what constitutes exclusively individualistic explanation. And these different accounts usually take the form of relaxing the requirements of exclusivity, that is, disclaiming overly narrow requirements for explanans, for explanantia, and so advancing alternatives to the meaning of individualistic in the strict sense. So the gist of that paper I wrote long ago in '68, the gist of the argument was that the strictest accounts are highly unpromising, if you interpret individualism very narrowly, offering implausible research programs, and that the accounts look ever more plausible as they incorporate what is social into the explanations they endorse. Insofar, that is, as the relevant features of the social context are, so to speak, built into the individual. Now, debate over that question, as I say, never goes away, and it's present today in, for example, among exponents of rational choice theory. So, I'm sorry to keep referring to things I've written, but I'll do it one more time. I revisited it. I wrote a book on individualism in the 70s, and in that book I tried to offer an explanation of why this doctrine is so appealing. And I won't go into that today, though we can talk about it in the discussion. But I still, despite the way, I mean, despite this continuing debate about the topic, I still find that I want to defend what I said in that little article in the 60s. In other words, I think, as you'll see, that I think that this doctrine is either, I still think it's either implausible or futile. And I think it's basically what I want to do today is to suggest that that resisting methodological individualism is essential if we're to make sense of social norms. So that's really what I want to do. Now, Durkheim. It was Durkheim, after all, who started this thing off in its modern form. That's to say, the claim that social facts are emergent or sui generis, and thus not to be explained at the level of individuals. This goes back, of course, before him to Auguste Comte, but it was given classical elaboration by Durkheim. And his account, however, is, and this is what I'm now going to argue, in one crucial respect, flawed. And where the flaw lies is, I think, peculiarly illuminating and relevant to my purpose. For Durkheim, social facts, and in particular représentation collective, are sui generis and result from the association of minds. Actually, he says two apparently contradictory things about this. First, that the common or collective consciousness or conscience collective, I quote, is only realized in individuals, and that collective representations are exterior to individual minds. That's the second thing. So, on the one hand, they're only realized in individuals. On the other hand, they're exterior to individual minds. In the essay on individual and collective representations, and elsewhere, Durkheim draws on analogies from chemistry, biology, and psychology. So chemical compounds result from the association of their separate elements. The properties of bronze are not found in copper and tin, or of water in hydrogen and oxygen. The cell is made exclusively of inanimate atoms. Life does not reside apparently separately in carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, though their association gives rise to it. Individual representations are likewise sui generis. They surpass, as he puts it, the substratum of neurons. Indeed, they are not, as he thought, decomposable or localizable, such that to each part there corresponds a distinct neural element. He wrote, such a geography of the brain belongs to the world of the novelette rather than that of science. The supposition that each representation dwells in a particular cell is a gratuitous postulate, he wrote in a typical style. So Durkheim took these analogies seriously. Social facts, he wrote, are in a sense independent of individuals and exterior to individual minds, and yet aggregates can neither wish, feel, nor act except through individual minds. Society, he thought, has for its substratum the mass of associated individuals and the system which they form by uniting together, and which varies according to their geographical disposition, and the nature and method of their channels of communication is the basis from which social life is raised and from which collective representations arise. There's something wrong here. I think it's clear, but the question is, what's wrong? What goes wrong? To help us answer this question, I enlist the aid of John Searle, who also wrote about social facts and collective representations, but was, how can I put this, innocent of Durkheim. Searle never really read Durkheim.
But he made a conference here.
Did he? Did he talk about this? Really?
About the topic.
Really?
And but he was hinted at Durkheim, excuse me for interrupting
you.
But I know that you won't be disturbed about this.
No. He and I have had an exchange about this. We've had more than one, actually. And I wrote an article called Searle versus Durkheim, which was fun. So here's the gist of that. Here is what Searle writes about Durkheim's analogies, and probably this is what he said here. The relations in the chemical alloys and compounds are causal relations. Similarly, the mechanisms by which the replication of DNA produces the cluster of phenomena we call life are causal mechanisms. In each case, there's a set of causes, the behavior of the lower level phenomena, and an effect, the resultant higher level feature. But this part of the picture will not work for collective intentionality. Though there are plenty of causal relations between individual and collective intentionality, the relation of individual minds to collective intentionality is, Searle's favorite word, constitutive, not causal. The collective intentionality is constituted by what is in individual minds. Collective intentionality can only function causally if it's constituted by what is in the minds of individuals. Searle argued that it was, I quote, impossible for Durkheim to explain the mechanisms by which social facts constrain, as Durkheim liked to say, individuals, because the collective representations are not in individual minds, says Searle about Durkheim. Though Durkheim did write, and did so repeatedly, this is me, that they are only realized in individual minds. It's understandable that Searle should have taken Durkheim to be committed to a dualistic ontology. That's the objection, the central objection Searle makes to Durkheim. It's understandable Searle should have attributed that to Durkheim, given Durkheim's characterization of social facts as sui generis, and his famous rule that they are to be treated comme des choses, as things. But the decisive question here is whether Durkheim needed to be so committed. Searle explains his own view as follows. From my point of view, Searle, the fundamental ontology in Durkheim is mistaken. He does not give a consistent, coherent account of the fundamental unity of the universe. We can make his claim that social ontology does not exist in individual minds consistent with the claim that it's realized in individual minds only at the cost of attributing to him a false conception of the relationship between the social and the individual. On my view, says Searle, collective intentionality has to be in individual brains because A, there's nowhere else for it to be, and B, that's the only place it can be if it is to function causally in shaping human behavior. Let me try to unravel this. By intentionality, Searle is referring to not to intending in the everyday sense, but rather to the capacity of mind to represent objects and states of affairs in the world other than itself. Representations are about something or directed at something. Collective intentionality is intentionality, for example, exhibited by many animals, including humans, that is intrinsically shared in common with another or others, incorporating doing, wanting, believing, and so on, something together. That's what collective intentionality is. Now, Searle suggests that this is a primitive phenomenon that can't be reduced to individual intentionality. That is explicated in terms of what each individual wants, believes, etc., including what he believes about what others believe, and so on. So Searle argues that no set of I consciousnesses ever, even supplemented with beliefs, adds up to a we consciousness. Intentionality, he claims, in individual heads can sometimes be an irreducible first-person plural form. And his central idea is that the crucial elements of collective intentionality, the crucial element, is a sense of doing, wanting, believing something together, and the individual intentionality that each person has is derived from the collective individuality that they share. So here, Searle illustrates this thought. What exactly is the relationship between the collective we and the singular I? If I'm acting as part of a collective, say, by playing a part in an orchestra, or by acting as a member of a political movement, I act only because of our shared collective intentionality, but all the same, the collective intentionality has to be able to move my body. So, he writes, I'm sorry to quote Searle so much, but I think this helps put put the point with maximum clarity, because I think he is wonderfully clear. Here he writes, "The fact that all intentionality has to exist in the heads of individuals doesn't require that we intentionality be reducible to I intentionality. There's no reason why we cannot have an irreducible we intentions in each of our heads when we're engaging in some cooperative activity. Of course, that we intention has to be systematically related to certain I intentions if the we intention is to be able to move each body. But the general requirements of what is sometimes called methodological individualism don't require that we intentions be reduced to I intentions." Here he's somehow saying, I want to be a methodological individualist. But notice, he's doing what I think one shouldn't do, namely incorporating what strict methodological individualism prohibits. He says, so the requirements that all intentionality exists in individual brains doesn't imply that the content that exists in individual brains cannot exist in the plural grammatical form. If we're cleaning the yard together, that in my head I have the thought, we are cleaning the yard, and in your head you have the thought, we are cleaning the yard. So that's the basic idea. Now, I think there are indeed several ways of understanding collective individuality. Philosophers disagree about this. Let's not go into it. But the next key point, which is also due to Searle, is to identify what is distinctive of human collective intentionality. And now we come to norms. Where Searle's claim, this is where the idea of constitutiveness comes in. By means of language, humans create and sustain institutional social facts, not just social facts, but institutional social facts that are ontologically subjective, that is, they're only real because people think they are, but they're epistemically objective, that is, we can attain objective knowledge of them. So what Durkheim failed to see, says Searle, and perhaps we should rather say that he lacked the philosophical apparatus to analyze, I'd prefer to put it that way, was that what enables human individuals to function is what he calls collective acceptance. That is to say, that people accept certain representations. I don't like that idea of collective acceptance. I think perhaps what we should say is there's a collective or mutual recognition of what Searle calls deontic powers. That is, rights, duties, obligations, responsibilities, and so on. These are requirements to act that are imposed by expectations that confront individuals, requirements, that is, which sociologists capture with concepts such as rules, norms, roles. For example, one of these deontic powers, obligations, is indeed what Durkheim focused on in his work, and in particular in the Rules of Sociological Method. Durkheim failed to see what was distinctive about the way in which obligations can constitute or coerce individuals. In the first chapter of the Rules, he assimilates under one concept, social facts, the impact of obligations with a variety of other examples of collective phenomena that individuals face and in different ways constrain them. You will recall, for example, that chapter includes as examples the following of rules to achieve our objectives: the pressures of crowd emotion, individuals caught up in conventions that enable people to coordinate and communicate, and evanescent currents of collective opinion and emotion, as in fads and fashions. Now, the point is that in the case of obligations, the pressure comes from others' expectations, which the individual recognizes as constraining. And what's at issue is a requirement that gives the individual a mutually recognized reason for action that is independent of, though it may coincide with, the individual's desires or preferences. A reason, moreover, on which the individual may or may not act. And such requirements are thus both central to any given individual, that is, I'll say that again. The point is that these requirements are both external to any given individual, that is, to individuals taken one by one, and on the other hand, internalized by them, recognized, though not always endorsed or acted on, and shared among individuals when they're together. So hence, the apparent contradiction in Durkheim, that collective representations are only realized in individuals but exterior to individual minds, is resolved. So I'm agreeing with Searle in his account of this. Now, what Durkheim was after, but didn't adequately capture and analyze, in other words, Searle wants to say he didn't see it. I think he did see it, but he didn't have the apparatus to make the point as clearly as Searle does, can be summed up in one word that is current among philosophically minded, and among philosophers and philosophically minded sociologists, namely normativity. And this is where I think Stephen Tenner and I may be either in agreement or disagreement. I'm waiting to find out. The social facts that form the central topic of the rules of sociological method are norms. Norms exist, as Durkheim put it, only in individual minds, and they are at the same time external to individuals, general or shared among them within a given social context, independent of them, that is, of each one of them taken severally, and in a sense that we need to grasp, sui generis. They can be, and here I touch on an issue which Werner raised just before, about how we couldn't think about the difference between law and morality. So, norms can be formal, as in law or official rules, or informal. Informal norms can be merely social, as in norms of politeness and etiquette, or they can be moral. And there are aesthetic, linguistic, epistemic, and other kinds of norms. Norms prescribe and proscribe, specifying what's acceptable and what's not. Breaching them triggers disapproval and self-reproach. We can bump into norms. I mean, they're kind of there. That was, I think, particularly well brought out in the work of the ethnomethodologists, and in particular Harold Garfinkel. They're binding, they have force, and they can exercise pressure to conform, especially when we resist or breach them. They're desire independent, in the sense that they may, though they may not, be contrary to their followers' desires or interests. They impose requirements. They specify what's obligatory or proper or appropriate. They assign entitlements. They fix what people have a right to expect and can legitimately demand from others. They may be followed deliberately and consciously, or spontaneously and unreflectively. Breaching them generates a range of distinctive emotions, or, as Strawson put it, reactive attitudes. People can feel resentful, insulted, or offended at norms violations and norm breakers. And norm breakers can experience remorse, guilt, and shame. People are inclined to punish norm breakers by means that range from violence to gossip. They render people accountable to one another. Well, we can go on. Perhaps we will. The point is, these are the features that mark out norms as social facts. Many of them, so far as we know, distinctively human. Institutional social facts. They are acquired and sustained through social interaction. Where individuals acknowledge and sometimes follow them, they acknowledge explicitly or implicitly, tacitly, communities, real or imagined, which share them. That's really important. They exist only because individuals believe in and conform to them, but they in turn influence and constrain individuals' behavior. They pre-exist, surround, and survive people, individuals, and they're external to individuals viewed severally, one by one, and they can involve group pressure when ignored or resisted, and they can even exist without being followed. These features, Durkheim's defining features of social facts, are fully recognized by contemporary scholars of norms, scholars who make no reference to Durkheim, some of whom even declare, I think misleadingly, their adherence to methodological individualism, even in the most extreme form of rational choice theory. So I'm just going to quote from a couple of these. There's a lot of discussion among philosophers of social science about norms, but it seems to me, even when they they claim to be methodological individualists. They aren't, or rather, if they are in the futile form I mentioned before, that works by expanding the notion of what individualistic means. So here is Cristina Bicchieri, who wrote a rather wonderful book called The Grammar of Society. She maintains that rational choice allows us to think of norms, now notice this, as a special kind of unintended collective outcome of individual choices. That's a mouthful. But what it actually conceals, it seems to me, is this move that involves incorporating the social into the individual. She writes, "The very existence of social norms depends on a sufficient number of people believing that it exists and pertains to a given type of a situation, and expecting that enough other people are following it in those kinds of situations. Given the right kinds of expectation, people will have conditional preferences for obeying a norm, meaning that preferences will be conditional upon having expectations about other people's conformity. Such expectations and preferences will result in collective behavior that fully confirms the existence of the norm in the eyes of its followers." So far, so good. Well, that looks like as though it's individualistic. But here's what she goes on to say. "Social norms have no reality other than our beliefs that others behave according to them and expect us to behave according to them. In equilibrium, such beliefs are confirmed by experience and thus become more and more ingrained as time goes on. Yet, norms," she acknowledges, "are causally effective, and in order to explain their effects, we must incorporate what makes them effective in the explanans," she says. "They are constituted by, that is, consist in, shared and interlocking beliefs in expectations, but the collective outcome of these is what has predictable effects on social behavior, so that we can make interesting and accurate predictions about the influence of norms in specific situations." So here are some examples. And here is where she makes the distinction, which I think is important, between conventions and social norms. So conventions that coordinate our behavior, like traffic rules and so on, can function in ways to signal certain status or to signal certain shared status or power. These will lack, she says, the distinctive causal power of norms, but they can become social norms when the rules constituting them, this is, she's saying, how do conventions become norms? When the rules constituting them have become so entrenched in the texture of our lives, so imbued with social meanings, note that, social meanings, that we cannot ignore them with impunity. Everyday life is rife with implicit conventions directing the way we speak, walk, and make eye contact and keep a distance from other people. We are seldom aware of them until they're broken. However, when they are breached, we may experience anger, outrage, and confusion. A person who speaks too loudly, stands too close, or touches us in unexplained ways is usually perceived as disturbing and offensive, if not outright frightening. Cultures differ in setting the boundaries of personal space, but once these boundaries are in place, they define normal interactions, help in predicting others' behavior, and assign meaning to it. Conventions, by contrast, of political decorum, such as manners and etiquette, are more explicit, but not less important, because, among other things, they signify respect for others and for social relationships. Breaching them can offend and bring forth retaliation. Well, here she's saying showing the ways in which conventions can be norms, can become norms. Like rules of etiquette can be norms, as opposed to, let's say, traffic rules. That's Bicchieri. Here's another, briefly, another set of scholars, Brennan and others, wrote a book called Explaining Social Norms. And I see I'm just coming up to 30 minutes. So, in a book called Social Norms, Explaining Social Norms, or is it Explaining Norms, by Brennan and others, philosophers working in Australia, they actually doubt that a reductive account of norms is possible. Why? They say they're skeptical that any reductive account will succeed. The primary source of our skepticism is as follows. Reductive accounts, in effect, divest norms of their most important and distinctive feature, to wit, their normativity. Here's where I'm wondering whether Stephen Turner and I disagree. Norms, these scholars argue, cannot be understood reductively in terms that refer only to practices or desires or preferences, in such a way as to exclude references to what is distinctive of norms. A satisfactory account of norms must retain an ineliminable normative element. Hence, norms are to be defined as clusters of normative attitudes plus knowledge of those attitudes, they say. They are social facts, and a normative principle is always a norm that is in or of a particular group or community. And I would add to that, this community could indeed be an imagined community. It doesn't have to be an actual one. And what makes a normative principle a norm of a particular group or community is that it is somehow accepted in that group or community. So we, they write, often go to great lengths and incur substantial costs to comply with norms, even when they're not formally institutionalized or backed by the threat of tangible sanctions. Norms are often highly complex and specific, yet somehow we manage to achieve an implicit grasp of what they require. Even when we regard norms as unjust, immoral, or simply downright silly, they can exert a powerful influence over our actions and attitudes. Some norms are relatively universal, others vary from community to community, and of course over time. They don't seem to be part of the fundamental fabric of the universe, yet it's not entirely clear where norms come from or why some exist and others don't. They're right. In other words, norms are distinctive in both existing in our minds and having causal power over them, which is exactly Durkheim's position. It is a crucial feature of norms, they say, that whether formal or non-formal, they have some kind of grip on our minds, grip on us, that makes them importantly different from, say, mere conventions, or mere commands, rather, backed by brute force. They have some kind of normativity in the eyes of ordinary members of the group in which they are norms. They make demands that in some sense the members recognize as such. Well, notice that all these scholars, despite their different, as it were, attitudes to the question of reductionism, they agree about three essential claims under discussion. Claims made by Durkheim, namely that norms only exist in individual minds, and insofar as individuals have certain beliefs and expectations, that they are causally efficacious, exercising pressure upon these individuals, and that they're massively important and pervasive throughout social life. They agree, in short, that norms are social facts, which is why I continue to maintain what I wrote in 1968, that the research program proclaimed by the doctrine of methodological individualism to explain what's social in exclusively individualistic terms is either implausible or futile. Thanks.